Herzlich willkommen zum Business, Intuition and More Podcast. Hier erkunden wir die Schnittstelle zwischen Business, Intuition, Spiritualität und Persönlichkeitsentwicklung, um dich auf deinem Weg zu einem erfüllten und erfolgreichen Leben zu unterstützen. In der vorliegenden Folge spreche ich mit der bezaubernden Rebecca Roberts. Rebecca ist Amerikanerin und lebt seit 13 Jahren in Basel in der Schweiz. Die ursprüngliche Innenarchitektin ist heute als Coach selbstständig tätig in den Bereichen Storytelling und Persönlichkeitsentwicklung. Im Interview spricht sie aus den Highlights aus 10 Jahren Selbstständigkeit. Sie erklärt, was sie jemandem rät, der heute neu in die Selbstständigkeit startet. Und sie führt aus, wie sie sich für den richtigen Weg entscheidet, wenn sie selbst vor einer Weggabelung des Lebens steht. Ebenfalls teilt sie ihre eigene Journaling Technik, wenn die Dinge nicht nach Plan laufen. Ich wünsche ganz gute Unterhaltung. Rebecca.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
I was looking forward for this.
Same.
Can you quickly describe what you do?
So, I am, at the heart of it all, somebody who loves helping people connect. And whether that's to themselves or to the people around them. And so the ways that that shows up is through mindset work and storytelling and facilitation in those areas through coaching or workshops or training. So as far as my work, that's the core of my work.
Was this always like that? I mean, this combination sounds like fairly unique.
Yeah, it grew out through time. So my background is actually in interior architecture. And a lot of people would go, wait, hold on, how did those two play in the same field? But I was lucky enough to work for a company that had a workplace psychology department as part of our design organization. And I can remember that group was the one that at the beginning with the relationship with the clients, they would go out, do the interviews, do the workshops, gather all of the information, and then bring that back to the designers. And I would always have a lot of questions, and I was so interested in what they were doing because I always loved the human element of how people interact with spaces, how the space that we're in makes us feel a certain way. And so I can remember I started doing more and more with anywhere that I could be involved with that department because I loved it. I loved the questioning, the curiosity behind how do we get the answers that we need to create the type of, in that case, physical space that would best serve those people. And when I moved to Switzerland, I was still doing design work, but I just kept feeling that pull back to the human element. And what I realized over time is, in essence, we're trying to do the same things with ourselves. We're trying to create an environment internally that makes us feel a certain way, that makes us feel at ease or safe or fulfilled or happy or whatever it might be. And that there are a lot of different ways to ask the right questions, to dig a little bit deeper, to build certain awarenesses that bring up those answers that we're searching for. And with the mindset work, that led to the storytelling because in essence, the thoughts that we have are the stories that we tell. And when we start looking, I just found that the storytelling was an easy access point because if you ask somebody, so what is your mindset around that? A lot of times they freeze because it's a big question. But if you ask, what is the story that you're telling yourself about this situation? A lot of times, because we think in stories, it's much easier to access that information. And so then we start to have the chance to look at those stories, ask, well, is that true? Is that real? Is that serving me? How can I play with it? And a lot of times then we have the chance to rewrite our stories.
So you basically ask your clients what's going on in their head, what stories they tell themselves.
Exactly.
I did that recently to my son, sorry to interrupt.
No.
And I asked him after a football game, what are the thoughts that are crossing your mind when you lose the ball? Because he was losing his nerves, he was not shouting around, but you could see in his gestures that he hated himself for losing the ball.
Yes.
And then I told him to change that moment, and I gave him suggestions what to tell himself not to go into this negative loop.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it, right? When we have the desire to feel stable within ourselves and then be able to connect with the outside world, right? That's the name of my company, this inner architecture. How do we build the structure internally to feel how we would like to present ourselves externally? And that's it. The more clear we are about those stories that we're telling, the more control we have over recognizing that we're the author of those stories. We've got the pen in our hands. Then we start to recognize, I have an easier time because I'm more clear here. The pathway between head and mouth also becomes clearer. And I start to be able to express myself in a more clear way instead of just going, that sucks. I can say, wow, I see that I'm actually really upset because that situation didn't turn out how I expected it to. Right? One just sort of blurts out information, and the other gives the outside world a lot more information that they can actually work with and communicate with.
I mean, thinking like that or reflecting about it is really simple. It sounds so simple, but in the situation itself, to react that way, to remain calm, make a step back, and then formulating appropriately what you really mean.
Two different stories.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think that this is also something that when I've had a lot of different changes in how I view success, in how I show up, how I communicate, all of these different things. Because at some point in time, I used to think, yes, when I'm in a calm state, I have an ideal of how I would show up and present myself when I'm pissed, when something doesn't go my way. Of course, I want to be the stoic one who handles everything with grace and poise and perfectly. But then we start to realize, but this is also part of the fun of being human, right? When you look at any great story, people lose their temper. Shit happens, right? Like things go wrong. And we don't sit through perfect stories. When we realize that part of what makes life beautiful is being dynamic, is sometimes losing our temper, and then being able to recognize, I see that didn't work so well. Let me recover. How can I repair this relationship, right? It's not about getting it all right. It's just about the moment where, hey, maybe I start to view success as the time span gets shorter between the times that I get really ticked off and I say the wrong things and I actually go and try and repair the relationship. Or in that moment when something really crappy happens that I can take a few breaths, and it doesn't mean that I'm upset, but maybe it just means, okay, now I know that I can handle this, but I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to be really pissed that this didn't turn out the way that I thought it would. It's not about becoming a cookie cutter perfect performance in life's interactions, but it is about being willing to look at ourselves in a fresh way, non-judgmental, being able to accept like we have a full spectrum of emotions. Acting joyful and grateful and all of these things are lovely, but without the rage and the frustration and all of this, that's also not full expression. It's just hopefully allowing ourselves to recognize those things fast enough so that we don't get ruled by those emotions that end up draining us of our energy and our joy. Yeah.
You are not very difficult to hear. You're from the US.
Yes.
You're from the south of the US?
Yes, Louisiana.
What brought you to Switzerland?
I came with my lovely ex-husband. We were both, in fact, we lived in the UK for about a year for a work rotation. And while we were over there, we spent every single weekend either traveling around or flying somewhere in Europe. It was the time of totally unacceptably like eco-unfriendly Ryanair and all of these where you could get flights for like 4 and 5 pounds kind of things. It was ridiculous. There were times, I think we flew to Prague for 20 pounds, something like this, round trip. But so we were traveling around Europe, and both of us just felt more at home here than we had in the US. Okay. And so we just opened ourselves up to exploring. And then the opportunity arose with his work. And we said, okay, let's do this. But if we do it like committed to being here at least 5 years, because we didn't want to just do a rotation, something like this. We wanted to really dive in and experience what it is to be in a new place and call that home. And so actually both of us are still here. He has a lovely wife that I'm friends with both of them. They're my favorite dog sitters. They love my dog, maybe sometimes even a little bit more than me, but that's okay. It's okay. But yeah, and just the opportunity to be here was a brilliant move for us.
And that was 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Here since 11 years.
Yeah, or actually no, now it's almost 13 years.
Oh wow.
Since 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one can really hear that. I talk to people coming from all over the world regularly. Yeah. But when you speak German, there's barely any accent, and that's rare.
That makes me so happy.
I haven't heard you talk in Swiss German though.
I plead the fifth to not have to speak Swiss German. Every now and then it comes out a little.
You have been self-employed since 10 years.
Yeah.
Can you describe some highlights?
There are a lot. There are also a lot of lowlights.
Let's talk about these after.
Yeah.
Start with the highlights.
The highlights. I mean, one thing is when you first start out to build something, you have an idea of what that might look like, but you have no idea of what the actual product, right? Like what it looks like. And I would say there's a beauty of a lot of naivety that goes along with this of, and then it'll be like this and I'll have freedom and then I'll be making lots of money and people will just flood in and won't that be great? I mean, I had a lot of naive moments, but there were these pivotal moments where all of a sudden something clicked, where I was sitting across from a client and I was realizing, oh my gosh, I'm able to communicate in such a way that they are seeing themselves in a fresh light. And they're having these aha moments about themselves. Because at the beginning, there's a lot of ego involved because it's how am I doing? Am I doing well enough? And at some point in time, there was this switch where I was able to just delight and enjoy. It became automatic enough, also with the business, that I was able to delight in what was going on with my clients, with the impact that they were making for themselves.
If you think back, how long did it last until you realized I can deliver value, this is clicking, this is working out, this is my business, what I do is working. I don't have to think about going back, finding something else, an alternative.
Yeah. Oh, this is an interesting one because there were plenty of times where I would say, at least my experience and many of the folks that I have as colleagues and fellow entrepreneurs, it's a roller coaster that exists a lot. That is the almost cyclical thing of, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Oh, this is wonderful. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine doing anything else. But the first few years, I was still doing a lot of consulting work for the design and then also doing the coaching. And at some point in time, I really made that flip of, okay, if I'm really going to commit to this, because this is what I'm passionate about working with people and helping them feel like I can be with myself without a lot of anxiety, then I need to let the design part go. And when that happened, and it happened partially from my own choice and partially from a shift in the market when everybody kind of brought things internally, and I was like, hey, thanks for making that decision easy for me. But there was a period about 3 years in where I just can remember it was around that same time of I stopped being so focused on, am I coaching well? Am I delivering value? Like constantly having that little dialogue running in the background, to being able to just release into the moment and allow things to flow through me when the information and the knowledge in my head finally went into almost like a integrated wisdom into the body, somehow into just deep knowledge from information to knowledge, I would say.
Did you, when you made the shift to coaching, did you do any school code?
Oh yeah,
have your own coaches, courses?
all of it.
All of that?
Yes. I mean, so what happened when I first moved to Switzerland, I was working for a design firm, and I had just these moments where I loved the people. I loved the work that I was doing to a degree, but I was also working primarily in trade fairs and showrooms, which are two spaces that, for me, they were too far removed from the human element. The showrooms were all about how do we show the furniture, and then people needed to work in it. So the focus wasn't on how do I create a space that works perfectly for them, but how do I first show the furniture and then afterwards think about the humans. And then the trade fairs, my sustainability background was always kind of having a little panic attack because I was creating spaces to be torn down 5 days later.
And scrapped?
Yeah.
Not used anymore?
I mean, parts of them, we tried to make them as reusable as possible. But the whole point is it needs to be something different from last year. It needs to be something that's novel and exciting. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity for reusing a whole lot of things. And so recycling was done, of course. But yeah, it was just really tough to kind of put those things together. And so I started looking for ways to get back to the human element. And I thought about going back and doing organizational psychology or workplace psychology. And then I thought, okay, before I invest too many years in that, let me see what else I can do to bring in this knowledge, this wisdom that I'm so curious about into the design world. And so I went back. I did a coaching certification in London. That was about a 1.5 year long program. Then I was super curious always about cognitive behavioral therapy, neuroscience, all of, like, being here in Switzerland. Jung is, one that has impacted me massively just throughout life. Just that idea of the capacity that he had for non-judgment, for looking at his own shadows. And so all of these different things have played in, and also continuing education, but also my own coaches, right? I mean, that was also a huge part of recognizing, wow, there's power here when you have the opportunity to have a mirror in front of you, somebody who's actively mirroring back what they're seeing and what they're hearing. It was just, yeah, it shifted things for me.
Do you still have a coach?
Yeah, I've got 2.
Okay. The same one, like back in time, or does that change over time?
They've changed over time, because there are times when somebody is amazing, but then you enter into a different phase of life, and it's okay, this is what I need now. And so I've got some peer coaches, but also a coach. I've got people that I can go and talk to for specific things and say, hey, I would love to do a session here. Because I know the value of having someone there guiding you through something. Because I have the capacity to see a lot, but it's very hard for me to see what's happening within me. I can remember one of my coaches making the comment after I shared this long, elaborate story. She was like, that is a beautiful story. You're totally full of shit. Do you want to try it again without all of the coachy bullshit layered on top? And I was like, damn. But
what did she mean?
She caught me. Like I was sharing what was going on with me, but I was justifying everything. I was putting it all in nice language. Yes, I see this. And it's disruptive, but I see that it has a purpose. She was like, Where's the actual emotion? I know what you're going through is not cool. I don't hear that. I hear all of it just under a layer of coach speak. And so that's so helpful to have those people who can go, yeah, nice story.
Brutally honest.
Nice story. You want to try it again without all the crap on top. So we all need that. Like I can do that really well for other people. I still need and I still benefit from people helping me out with that. And I'm lucky that I'm also surrounded by a lot of people that we've built up those types of friendships where we can also call each other out on these things. So yeah.
I thought there was an element of spirituality in there when you said you allow things to flow through you. Where does this come from?
Yeah. There's a model that I can remember learning once, and I only learned part of it. And then I began to really understand it, because there's this to me, by me, through me idea. So the kind of lower levels of awareness come thinking life happens to me, right? It's that victim state. It's the place where we think that we have to fight for everything in life. And it's really this very I am acted upon by life. Then as we feel like we start to understand ourselves a little bit better, we start to recognize, oh my gosh, I can move things. Like how I am interacting with life, I can make things happen. I can choose how I interact with somebody actively, intentionally, and that changes the outcome. So we start to think, life happens by me. I am creating life. And this is an incredibly powerful shift. The one that I find so insane, and I'm sure that there are people that probably can do it. I haven't found the way to live in this zone because it's kind of like this flow state, but it's life flows through me. Like it's not that I'm not active in my life, but I'm not having to make things happen. I'm moving with life. And I've experienced it before, for example, in coaching sessions where a thought has just popped into my head as I'm talking with a client, and it's weird. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand what it means. It feels like a strange analogy or a strange story. And for a very long time, I would just be like, well, that's dumb. Okay, just push that away. And then I was working with a client that I have an excellent relationship with, and that idea came up, and I just thought, okay, well, this is a safe enough space for me. Again, my ego, right? That I feel like I can share what's coming up. And I just made the comment, it's funny, I have this mental image showing up that is X. And they stopped and they were like, this is exactly the scenario that used to come up in my childhood with my grandmother. And she always used to say this, and they said the phrase. And like, there's no way that I could have known this. And it wasn't a normal analogy that would pop up into my head. It wasn't a normal picture. But in that case, I have no idea why and how I had access to that information, but it was exactly what they needed in that moment to be able to connect back to something that actually gave them a huge amount of stability, gave them a way to move forward with the current situation that they were facing. And after that, I started to ask, okay, have I been blocking somehow this connection to universal consciousness, call it whatever you want, things that I don't know how I know, but I know. So yeah.
So that coaching, it was really helpful to
Massively.
That coaching in that moment.
Yes.
I mean, I know somebody who gives courses,
yeah.
who sometimes talks,
yeah.
and he says he does realize that he is talking, but he couldn't repeat what he is saying.
Yes. Yes.
And he says the same. It's flowing through him.
Exactly.
It's not coming from him as a person.
Exactly. And this is the same with those videos that I create, right? I know generally what it is that I want to say. And this might sound a little silly, but there are times where I will start smiling in the middle of a video, or I laugh a little bit because something comes out and I'm like, damn, that's good. I did not plan, like, I don't know where that came from, but that's awesome. And it's exactly that. I just open myself up and film, and what comes out just very often surprises me with the connections that happen inside of the topic and things that come up that are beautiful analogies that I've never thought of before, that just came.
And they're fairly long sometimes, those talks.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, did she learn all of that by heart?
No, not at all. I generally, I know often what sparked the idea for the video, and I know generally where I want to go. That's one of the things with storytelling. If you know where you want to go, that's 90% of the battle. But there are also times where something comes up and it completely changes direction, and all of a sudden I go, oh, that's really the key point of this. Okay.
Do I perceive this right, that this is fairly new? I mean, just talking, I just know your Instagram because I checked it.
Yeah.
And there was a shift in these videos. And after the shift, the way I perceive the content is so much stronger. It's so much more straight from the heart, I feel.
Yeah.
So is that development fairly new?
The letting it flow has been there for a while, that connection to something that's flowing through me. But the shift that happened, I had a phase where layers were peeled back, right? Where all of a sudden it wasn't an additive effect, it was a subtractive. It was, this is not who I am. This is not who I am. Things that at some point in time I had pulled to myself as a means of trying to be worthy, be enough, be whatever it is that I thought that the world wanted or was asking of me in order to be successful. And I just went through this phase where it was 10 years of self-employment. And I was realizing, my God, what is it that I'm actually doing? What is it that I want? Is this what I want to continue doing? And if so, how do I want to continue doing that? So there was a chance for deep introspection. And what came out of that was the beautiful shedding of certain layers that I realized, oh, I don't need these anymore. And that allowed for a lot of different communication style.
How did you get to the point where you realized this is a subtraction? There's nothing new I need to learn. I don't need to add. I need to remove.
That awareness keeps deepening. That's been probably about when I started doing the coaching work. That was something that became quite obvious, because I can remember feeling like going through this phase right after I finished the coaching certification, where I felt like, okay, I have all of this wisdom and knowledge and understanding from the design world, but who the hell am I to be coaching now, right? What is this? And so it was this idea of, how do I gain more certifications, more credentials, more things that make me worthy of somebody else paying me to help them. And then realizing that actually, as I added those things on, it wasn't making me better. It was instead making me focus so much on, was I worthy because of the papers, and was I worthy because of that particular process, and the ability to spout out, this is the system that we will use. And instead, I then just experimented first with that idea of, what if I just let those ideas go and I'm just present with the person that's across from me? And what I realized was, what stayed and stuck became part of a toolbox that was already within me. And what fell away was just a lot of the ideas that were beautiful and helpful. And I'm insanely grateful to them, because they opened up new possibilities within my mind, but I didn't need to hold on to them as like armor of, I'm worthy. And then that just continued. Okay, what else don't I need? I think a lot of times as we get older, we also go through this shift of, we've been trying to justify ourselves for a long time. And at some point in time, you realize, who am I trying to justify myself to anymore? And that's sometimes a beautiful shift. I think a lot of times this is also where this idea of midlife crisis comes from. I think a lot of times that's us waking up to, I have been living my life for somebody else for so long. Who the hell am I? And what do I actually want to create, contribute? And then we start recognizing, wow, we've got a lot of things that are just kind of hanging on that I don't need to hang on to anymore.
The toolbox you mentioned, how did you find access to the toolbox?
I think partially it was the things that really resonated with me. I think everybody has different things in their toolboxes. So some things were things that really resonate. So the idea of self-leadership and how to hone certain skills of awareness and curiosity, and those things that are naturally things that I'm drawn to, things that align with my values. It makes sense then that the practices and the processes that can actually help us get more access to those parts of ourselves, those were the things that just stayed in my toolbox. And other processes that didn't resonate so well with me, or that I tried out with clients and they kind of fell flat, either because of me or because it didn't resonate with them, then I was able to let that go. So I was doing a constant process of, okay, I love playing with this. I love working with this. How do I explore? And I love learning. That's something that I love. And so part of the work that I do is, because I love learning, I love taking new things on. And I go through this process on a regular basis of going nuts into topics, like going into the rabbit holes, gathering all of this information, and then getting totally overwhelmed by it and saying, okay, of all of that I've just collected, what are the things that actually I want to keep around? And loads of things fall to the side. And then out of every time that expansion happens, 1 or 2 or 3 things that I just adore end up in the toolbox. And then I go through a phase where I go, okay, let's play with this. Let's play with the newly arranged toolbox. And then inevitably the inhale comes again, where I go, okay, what am I exploring right now? And it's normally just something that sparks off a period of intense curiosity.
Are there things you could skip in hindsight that you did? And I was particularly thinking about, you're talking about this removing layers and the toolbox. And then I thought, was the certifications necessary?
I can remember there was one time that was so helpful, and it was a time where I was feeling totally inadequate as a coach. And I can remember just telling my ex-husband, I don't understand why anyone would come to me. Like, I'm so messed up. How in the world can I help other people? How can I say that I can help other people? And his words were so helpful. He said, look, I think it's because of these times that you'll be able to relate so much better, because we've all been through horrible times. We've all experienced feeling defeated, feeling like we're worthless, feeling like all of these different things. This is a chance for you to soak up this experience and to recognize that this is what so many people are going through, learn from it and move forward with it. And I think that applies everywhere. Yes, there are things that now looking back, I would go, if I had to do it again right now, wouldn't do it. But I think to take any part of our history out, we have no idea what bits and pieces are integral to what is part of the toolbox, is part of what we love, that came through that. I have courses that I've done that I absolutely hated, but I met one person in that course that I had conversations with that changed the course of my life. So I think that's one place that I look back with gratitude, even on the horrible parts, and you start to see, but that served its purpose somehow. Maybe I don't even know. Maybe it was also for somebody else. I have no clue. But so no, I wouldn't change anything.
If someone consulted you
Mm.
and said, I want to start now,
Mm.
I want to become a coach,
Mm-hmm.
what do you tell the person?
So this is a little bit of what's been spinning around in my head for a while, is that I'm getting the feeling that we are all going to need to be coaches very soon because of the way that life is moving and shaping and transitioning so fast. I think that the skills that I learned as a coach are becoming universally necessary to handle the massively changing environment that we live in, the incredibly dynamic workplaces that we have, all of these kinds of things. So I think the skills, 100%, everyone would benefit from. As far as making a career from coaching, I would say one of the biggest things is, can you be as in love with creating a business as you are with coaching? Because if you can't do both, you won't be successful. And it's a hard truth, but I know way too many people that have thought, oh my gosh, I just want to be a coach and I want to work for myself and this is going to be amazing. And they didn't love the business side and they got so frustrated with, well, why can't I just do what I love?
What do you mean by that? What is the business side?
Being able to run a business, find clients,
Sell.
And love that process of creating clients. That's one of these things that comes from Steve Chandler. Actually, he's got this book that was a life changer for me. I'll have to remember the name of it, but he talks about, if you can't love the process of creating a client, meaning showing somebody how this could be beneficial for them, you'll never be successful as a coach, unless you want to be inside of an organization that naturally funnels people to you and that you can support. But it's a business as well, right? And it's just like if somebody says, I'm just going to sit back and wait for the business to come to me, right? It doesn't work like that. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert at everything, but you have to love the idea of having a business. And that goes for every industry. It's not just coaching. But I think I've seen it happen just a lot of times where people think, yeah, I'm going to do this and I get to do coaching full time. You're not doing coaching full time. You're doing coaching part of the time and you're building a business part of the time. And it's incredibly worth it. It's tough, right? I mean, I've had so many times where I've asked myself, is this really what I want to keep doing? Because it's a constant process of building up clients. It's a constant process of putting yourself out there, of learning and growing. And it is absolutely amazing, but it is not just coaching. Yeah.
I think you need to excel in a number of disciplines.
Yes.
In order to make this work.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, all the disciplines you mentioned, you named, you need to sell, you need to market yourself,
Yeah.
you need to connect, you need to go out, you need to, I mean, until accounting, everything. It's the whole...
You wear every hat that you just, from whatever the company is that you just left, think of every department that's in there, you're about to wear it. Ta-da! And again, it's not to say that it can't be done. There are absolutely people that are doing it. It's just to say it's very easy to fall into that illusion of, I just want to help people. And part of helping people is finding the people to help. And it's making your business run. And it's finding a way that, I can remember it being described as, you have to love the exhale as much as the inhale, right? You can't just, oh yes, this is wonderful. You also have to have the give and the take of both sides. Yeah.
What are mistakes that you would recommend a newcomer shouldn't do?
Oh gosh. That's a big one. What I was just talking about, right? Thinking that, yeah, that'll just come. What are some mistakes? I think one is thinking that you can do it all alone. Meaning you need to have a beautiful network around you of people that you can learn from, that are mentors, that are people that you can bounce ideas off of, especially if, like me, you're an extrovert, you love people, you love being around people, and then all of a sudden being like, hey, I'm self-employed, let's work by myself all the time except for clients. That was a big shock. And I ended up working from cafes because I just needed the energy and movement around me. But that was a really big one, is to not be afraid to ask for help, but also to surround yourself with people that challenge you and can support you.
The first 3 months of being self-employed, did you feel lonely?
Yes. Well, there was still a buzz. The first 3 months were easier because there was this massive buzz. There was so much going on. It was like, okay, what am I doing here? How am I going to do that? And it wasn't like reality hadn't quite hit.
So it's like the excitement which is still there.
Oh, yeah.
And then you surf this wave.
Yes. And then at some point in time, it was like, I can remember just sitting in the home office and being like, wow, I'm really lonely. And realizing, okay, I need to see this first. What's going on? Okay, there's feeling isolated, feeling like I'm lacking inspiration, how do I remedy that? And luckily, because of all the things that I was learning, I knew how to ask myself a lot of those questions. And
how do you do that? How do you do that process? Do you have a special tactic to approach this?
I just get curious, like really.
But is that just happening in your head?
Well, okay. Oh, excellent. Thank you for asking exactly this question, because one of the things that I find most helpful is writing things down.
Okay. Journaling.
Asking a question and then just writing, almost stream of consciousness journaling. There is something to the process. Also different. I used to use, and I still do, I use voice messages to myself quite a lot, or voice to text when I need to get something down quickly. But there is something tactile and something that involves many more of the senses when you're asking yourself a question, you're asking yourself to self-reflect, and then your hand is actually writing on paper. For me, it's a massive difference.
Do you go into a special zone when you want to do this? Is this at a particular day of the time of the day?
In those times when I'm struggling, it's at the point of most pain, right? And it could be wherever. If I was in a cafe, I would just open up a notebook and, okay, start asking questions. Sometimes just what's going on. I don't know, I'm just feeling like this. And one thing that I know now that I didn't know then is a lot more of the somatic, like, where am I feeling tension in my body? What am I experiencing right now? How am I feeling? Am I feeling tight? What's the emotion that's there? So I've learned how to ask better questions of myself over the years, but so much of it, just writing it down and giving yourself, also setting a timer can be a great one, that I have to just write for 15 minutes because it keeps me from copping out of being like, I'm fine. That'll be my answer.
In that moment of writing, do you have the impression you're analyzing and writing down what your head is telling you? Or is it the same feeling like the information is flowing through you?
I feel like in that case, it's flowing through me, but probably from a little bit different place. In that case, it feels less like it's universal consciousness, and it feels more like my subconscious. I'm just opening up as much as is possible because I'm curious. I'm writing, and like a lot of times things will come up, and what I'm actively trying not to do is analyze what I'm writing, because then I start thinking, oh my gosh, that's so dumb. And if I think that's so dumb, I write down, that's so dumb. So I'm really just trying to, it's almost like, this is a gross analogy, but you know, like in the sink when you've been cooking a lot and all of that, and then you gotta empty the little trap. It's kind of like that, emptying that out so that things can flow more easily. And there's a lot of junk that just builds up, and a lot of interesting things and beautiful things as well. It's not all crap.
And once it's written down, what happens after?
Then I generally close it and leave it for like 24 hours, and then I come back to it.
you go back to
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's something to that capacity to come with a fresh eye and reread what you read. I don't read it in that moment. But coming back to it 24 hours later, it's so interesting to start to realize, okay, I see, because you start to see themes then. Okay, I see frustration as a big theme. I see like these are all indicators of I'm not taking very good care of my body or my health right now. So maybe that's part of why I'm really not feeling very good. Okay, this is something that's going on here. Just with clear eyes, I see things differently than if I'm in the middle of my super frustrated rant.
And then when coming back to this feeling lonely
Mm.
again,
Mm-hmm.
how did you remedy this?
I'm still working on it.
Okay, that's just a part of...
It is. I mean, one thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at different options of what's possible as far as collaborations, as far as shifts, because there is one part of me that really says, hey, I think some things that have worked in the last 10 years, I don't imagine them in me wanting them in the next 10. So also trying to be really honest with myself in those places and asking, I would love to be part of a team. What does that look like? Because being part of a collaboration versus being part of a team, two very different things. Because a collaboration is, yeah, we're walking side by side, but we both have our own umbrellas and we both have our own visions and ideas, but we're working on a joint project. Whereas on a team, you're under the same umbrella, you've got joint vision, joint goals, you're working towards something together. It's a different experience. It's something that I miss.
And how about if you build a team around you?
And I have considered that a lot of times. I am not drawn to this. Like I've been told so many times, well, why don't you expand? Why don't you try this out? I just, everything in my body goes, no.
Okay.
At least for now.
So, but then when you say you want to be part of a team, then that would mean you go back to employment.
Possibly.
Okay.
Possibly. And that's also a really interesting thing about this whole dialogue, right? Is there's one part of me that goes, failure, right? Like that immediately
Really?
goes, well, you've done it now for 10 years, so you're going to drop out. But these are all, and this is part of that self-reflection, to pay attention to all of the storylines that are going on inside of the head. There's possible excitement and curiosity, but next to that, there's shame and my pride and a little bit of my ego that's like, yeah, but I want everybody to think that I've got my shit together and that,
Well, I mean, after 10 years, mean, you cannot do something for 10 years without doing it right.
Of course, in many ways. And that's also part of probably one of the biggest things that have grown over the years is the capacity for self-compassion, to hear all of those different voices and go, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, because all those little parts of myself, right? The things that have been built up in me since I was a little kid. I mean, in some ways, literally, I can hear there's certain little voices that sound like a little girl inside of my head. You can hear that, oh, but what if they don't like me, right? And just to be able to hold all of that and say, none of it is good or bad, right or wrong inside of there. But when you start to be able to identify what it all means, then you can say, yeah, but what is it that I truly desire to create next? And with a lot of that, it says, hey, thank you so much for trying to protect me. I've got it right now. I don't need this. And that's also part of that peeling back layers, is not chopping off our arms, right? Because there's a lot of times where we're at war with ourselves. We're like, nope, that part of me needs to just go away. That never goes away. That becomes shadow. So it's about, how do we still have a loving relationship with ourselves and acknowledge, hey, things shift, things change. I shift, I change. What is it that I truly desire now? And I still don't know exactly what the answer is to that, but then when you bring in some curiosity, then it's kind of fun to explore.
Or maybe it changes again. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just phases in our lives, probably
Totally.
that come and go.
Totally. And I think this is something that is, well, that's a little bit why I say I think we will all have to become coaches in certain ways, is because I think that one of the greatest skills that everyone who is still in the working world is going to have to master is learning how to learn. And then also learning how to communicate. So things change so fast that I think we will all have multiple careers and multiple things along the way. And I think that that is going to become even more prevalent. And on top of that, the temptation or the ease to become more and more isolated will also exist, because as things become more remote, as we stop having meetings face to face, but we're working with someone across the world and we're doing everything virtually. I mean, we know this from Corona. We can function almost solely from within our homes. But then how do we maintain that connection? How do we deal with changing systems and changing circumstances?
With the situation you described, with the options that you have, how do you get to the right decision?
It's interesting thinking about right decision, right?
For your situation,
Exactly.
your person.
Yes. And that's right now. It's funny. I had a conversation today, and the discussion led to a place, and I was in an emotional state this morning during this conversation, because I realized, oh, there's something there. And I can remember making a statement, and as soon as I made that statement, I could feel my body exhale. And it was a statement that was prefaced with, I don't know if I even believe this, but blank. I'm not ready to share it yet. And I could literally feel my nervous system go, oh, that feels better. And that's something that the more I listen to myself, the more I play in these realms, the more that it tends to be right becomes, is this in alignment? Is something in me fighting this? And if so, is that part fighting because I'm scared because it's so exciting and it's a big step, or because it feels like a cop-out and a way out of what my heart and what my body and my mind is actually saying, hey, this is what I want and what I would choose right now. So more and more right becomes like equivalent to, is this in alignment? And sometimes it's also just, is right what I'm willing to try out until I prove that it's wrong. Which sometimes that's also just the case, right? We step into something thinking, hey, this could be amazing. 3 months in, we go, oh, no. And then also just giving ourselves the space to say, yep, hey, that was awesome. I'm glad I tried it, because I wouldn't have known. And I may have always asked myself the question, but now I know that wasn't the right thing.
It takes a lot of courage to think that way, and to just do it.
Yeah. And sometimes I talk bigger than what I actually am. You know, sometimes on the outside, I'm like, yes, I'm so graceful. I'm going home, I'm like, that was horrible, you know? And that's where it's really helpful to have those friends that you can just call up and be like, I'm a mess. Can I come over? And they go, sure, I've got the fondue on. Melty cheese solves everything.
Yeah. And for dessert, chocolate fondue.
Absolutely.
How do you relax talking about that?
Got a few things from different categories. So one way, because I spend a lot of time in my head, because I like to think and I like to process, and creativity and all of this, one good way is to dive down into my body. So sauna, breath work, meditation is something that comes and goes in my life. It's not a consistent although I know that consistently it would be good. So it's not for lack of like, oh, that doesn't work right now. It's for lack of, that's something that consistency would have been a good thing for. Which I've got a friend that always reminds me of this, like meditation, it'll work. But a lot of it coming back to the body, because I spend the time up here and it's like kind of drawing the energy down and saying, okay, so let's just be here. Being out in nature is also a big one. Spending time with friends.
How about cold exposure?
Yes, I love it. I love it. That's a huge part of the sauna experience, is how I first got into that. And then a number of years ago, we had a group that was Friday is Rhine Day, and it started with a really small group of us. And every Friday at 8 a.m. we would go to the Rhine and do a dip. And it started really small. I'm still in the group, but it's gotten so big, and it does this oscillating as well, but all throughout the winter. And
seriously?
Oh yeah.
You go in winter?
Yeah, we did.
It's about
this year
8 degrees.
Well, it depends. And there were a lot of days where it was colder outside than it was in the water, and those were, that was fascinating.
And then you just stay for a few seconds.
No, try and stay for as long as possible. I need to work my way back up from where I used to be, but I used to stay in for, on those days, sometimes a minute or two. We had a few people in the group that were hardcore. My gosh, they could just stay and act like nothing ever happened. It was incredible. So they were my idols.
Wow.
But then there are things like, for example, Wim Hof, these types of things where you combine breathing and cold water exposure, not at the same time, but that also can help the whole body just relax. And the great thing about cold water exposure is that it's very hard for your mind to focus on anything else. So it brings you down. You're there.
Yeah, I tried that.
Yeah.
I tried to listen to a podcast while doing cold exposure.
How would that go?
Not working. It is not working.
Yeah, that I can imagine.
It's just not working.
Yeah.
So, if I understand correctly, there's no fixed routine that you follow, something that you do on a daily or on a weekly basis, but you just do whatever comes to mind and is best for you in this situation.
Right now, that's where I am. I go through phases that I have a much clearer routine. I'm feeling that coming. And again, it's not like now I will give myself the space to be free. It's also just sometimes I'm better at holding a routine than other times. But my routine is never hard. It's never been hardcore fixed. Normally, it's a few different things that I love, that I know are valuable, that act as like my own little relaxation toolbox, right? That I can pull from. One thing that is absolutely consistent though is journaling. Even if it's just, I've got a journal on my phone, even if it's just what was a photo from today and what basically happened. Because that's the capacity to self-reflect that I find in this little app. It will show you on today, you have 4 journal entries from past years. And I can go back and see what happened on this day last year or back. I've been doing it since 2014.
That's very cool.
And it's absolutely amazing.
And what's the app you use?
It's Day One, I think is the name. And it's just, I adore it. I absolutely, and you can, so I put a photo every day because I also find it's really interesting just what is something that I captured in that day. And it's really interesting to also recognize, oh my gosh, that was only a year ago that this happened, or oh my God, that was 10 years ago. Like, that's insane. Okay. So it's also beautiful to just recognize that sometimes having these little tools to reflect, whereas some other people will go back and be able to pull a notebook off a shelf and read back into a journal. I am way too chaotic with journal entries. They're in every notebook that I own, all over the house. I'm like, oh, that's from 2016. What happened then? Oh yeah, that was a tough time. Okay. Yeah.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Probably the best way would either be LinkedIn. or on my website. So
how can they find you on LinkedIn with your
LinkedIn
name?
is Rebecca Lagarde Roberts, so it's actually including also my middle name, just because there were a lot of Rebecca Robertses. But then my website is rebeccaroberts.com. Yes.
Thank you very much for this.
It's my pleasure. It's been fun to play around.